Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rashmita, and I am the event planner for Microsoft Reactor India. This session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. But before we begin, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat section will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. So please feel free to drop all your questions in the chat section. I would now like to welcome our speaker for today's session, Bob and Kamalashri. Bob is a developer advocate for Microsoft focused on Microsoft 365 and Azure development, especially building apps for Microsoft Teams using Graph API. Our next speaker, Kamala Shri, is a developer advocate at Microsoft. She is a Google developer expert with 12 years of experience in web technologies, Android, Flutter, and Harmony OS. But for now, let me bring Kamal into the stream.
Hi,
Here
Rashmita.
you go. Hey, hi, Kamal. How are you doing?
All good. Thank you.
Over to you. I'll be at the backstage.
Sure. Thank you so much. Hey, folks. Good evening, everyone. Excited to be kickstarting another session in Copilot Chronicles. Yes, you heard. We have kind of come up with a new name for our series from the Tech Talk series to Copilot Chronicles. So, going forward, the series would be called as Copilot Chronicles. And whenever you see a tag on the social media or the meetup links talking about this, it's going to be about Copilot Chronicles. So last week we had seen about how to transform the way you work with Microsoft 365 Copilot. Shrishti, the one of the MVPs, kind of spoke about it as to how Microsoft 365 Copilot could fundamentally change the way we work or interact and leverage Microsoft suites for productivity tools, or it could be making more intelligent, innovative, intuitive, supportive user workflow needs. So we saw whether it could be in terms of enhanced productivity, streamlined collaboration, automated tasks, how Copilot was kind of playing a very important role, and how it kind of minimizes our daily automated work, or whether integrating with Microsoft Teams or accessibility feature, or just for the sake of either learning a new skill development. So we could see whether it could be a GitHub Copilot or Microsoft 365 Copilot, which serves as an education tool. So overall, we had seen about a lot of this. In case if you have missed it, definitely I'll leave a link in the description where you can go check out our previous Copilot Chronicle series and the future Copilot Chronicle series. What are the upcoming events? And today we have Bob. Again, I think Rashmita has already spoke about Bob, who's a cloud developer advocate. He's one awesome colleague of mine whose focuses on Microsoft 365 and Azure development in building apps. So I'll not talk too much about him because he's been a part of the series where I try to bring him and talk about anything related to M365. And he's the best person to talk about it. And today he's going to talk about how to extend Microsoft 365 Copilot. You will learn more. I mean, rather than learning, you will understand what are the approaches M365 Copilot and when to use it. Because everybody has this confusion. They know about Copilot from the last series, but what are the approaches? How do I build one? What are the different ways can I use to build? Is it just one approach? So today, all your questions are going to get cleared. So I'll not talk too much about it. I'll hand over to Bob. So Bob, looking forward to it.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much, Kamal.
Yeah, and the
It's my
stage is
pleasure.
all. Yeah, thank you so much, Bob, for being always. Looking forward to it, and the stage is all yours.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, yeah, hi, I'm Bob German, and today's topic is Extend Copilot for Microsoft 365 with your line of business apps and data. So, that's really what this is all about. As Kamal said, I'm Bob German. I won't say too much else about myself. It is what it is. And let's go ahead and take a look at what we plan to cover today. So, starting off with just talking about what is Copilot for Microsoft 365. Not everyone is familiar. So I'll provide a little bit of an overview of that and also a little peek under the hood on how it actually works and how end users can use it. And then, as Kamal said, there are different approaches to extending this with your own business data. And those are primarily building plugins and building what's called graph connectors. So we'll take a look at both of those. And then at the end, I've got some pointers on how to get started, and we'll have some time for Q&A. So this can all be a bit confusing. There are a lot of products called Copilot, and it sort of can get a bit overwhelming when you think about them all. I like this slide because it sort of breaks it into three categories: adopt, extend, and build. So adopt refers to, just taking software as a service Copilot, right? So in a way, there's also kind of, most of these Copilot experiences are software as a service. In other words, there's a chatbot. It's called Copilot, and it's built into one of these products: Microsoft 365, Dynamics, Power Platform, etc. Then you can extend those, and that's the primary topic for today, is extending Copilot from Microsoft 365 with plugins and graph connectors. There's also the option to build your own Copilot, which is really an artificial intelligence-based chatbot that we just informally call Copilot, but then that's your chatbot, and maybe you're bringing it into the user interface for a product like Microsoft Teams, which has the ability to include chatbots in the applications. And you might build that with something like Copilot Studio or Azure AI Studio. So I'm not going to talk about those. So there's just too much for one session, right? We're just going to focus on the Copilot software as a service that's built into Microsoft 365 and how to extend it. So if you take a look at this, you're already probably familiar with Microsoft 365. It's a suite of productivity and collaboration applications. And then if we take that and we add the power of large language models running over the internet and being able to bring in information from the internet, as well as take advantage of more powerful computing that's up in the cloud, and then bringing in your data from your Microsoft 365 tenant, and then bringing that into the Microsoft 365 apps. That's really what we're talking about when we say Copilot for Microsoft 365. So for example, you can ask Copilot to summarize chat conversations in Teams for the last so many days. You could ask it to draft an email message, or you could ask it to create a meeting agenda based on previous meetings. Maybe you want it to actually draft a project proposal based on things that are in your documents and spreadsheets. So there's a lot of different options, and these different Copilot client experiences, if you will, turn up in a bunch of different places, including Teams, the Microsoft 365 application, Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of them. And right now they're all kind of a little bit individual. We're working on kind of bringing them all together and unifying them. So the plugins that I'm going to show are going to work right now in Microsoft Teams Copilot. And the graph connectors will work throughout. So I'll get into that a little bit more later. But I'd rather just show you an example. So here is Microsoft 365 chat. This is Copilot running in Microsoft 365. And I'm just going to ask it a question about the milestones for Project Falcon. Now, how is it going to know about Project Falcon? Well, if we're not careful, it's going to make up stuff, but it's not. It's actually showing me the correct data. And you can see here that it knows about all these different milestones. And you can see also that I'm able to get more detail, including a reference. Where did that information come from? Oh, it came from this PowerPoint deck. Let's go ahead and look inside the PowerPoint deck, and you'll see that indeed here are those milestones, right? So in the past, you would have gone and searched, maybe found the deck, and then had to look through the deck to find this information. Here, Copilot is actually pulling out the information, only the information you asked for, and serving that up to you in an easier to understand form. So this is all quite useful. And I'd like to just kind of go through how does it actually work, right? Like it starts with a user prompt, and you saw me ask it about Project Falcon. And then that's going to go into, and that could be coming from these various applications. Now that prompt is going to go into Copilot, which is, you can think of it as sort of more than just a large language model. It's really orchestration. This is going to go in and do several steps to answer your prompt, only one of which has to do with a large language model. So what are the milestones for Project Falcon? And the first thing that Copilot is going to do is it's going to pre-process that request and something called grounding. So, if a person isn't grounded, maybe they're making stuff up. If an AI isn't grounded, it might be making stuff up or hallucinating. So the goal here is to provide information to the large language model that's relevant to my question so that it's grounded in reality, or as close to reality as my PowerPoint deck might be. It's based on real information. So how does it do that? Well, it uses two things. One is the semantic index, which is a new search index that is based on semantics rather than syntax. So in the past, if you searched, it was doing text matching, and maybe it was doing lemmatization and kind of textual techniques to match up the words. Here it's actually using AI vectors to come in and say, look, he asked about Project Falcon, he asked about, milestones, and maybe that information is in a different language. Maybe it's written in Hindi or French or some other language, right? The semantic index is going to take the meanings of the words and match them up, which is much more powerful. And then it's going to use the Microsoft Graph, which you may be familiar is the API for getting at all the data in Microsoft 365. And it's going to pull in the data that it finds, which in this case is going to be that PowerPoint deck. Then it gets that back and it uses that to modify the prompt. So this is a technique called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to look up some information somewhere and use that to include in the prompt so that the large language model has the details that it needs, or as many as we can provide it, to make sure that it's going to respond with more factual data and not random thoughts that it might have. Then that gets fed into the large language model. The large language model is responsible also for enforcing responsible AI rules so that we don't end up doing something illegal or unethical. And then it's going to send back the response. And again, we're going to ground this. One of the things we're doing throughout this grounding process is enforcing security. So if I didn't have access to that PowerPoint deck, it wouldn't have been able to answer my question, right? Maybe Project Falcon is a big secret. So it's going to come back, if I don't have access to the PowerPoint, it's going to come back and say, I don't know anything about it, right? Because I'm not supposed to know about it as a user. And anyway, it's going to come back and it's going to gather those references that you saw on the screen and complete the response and send that back to the user. So all of this happens fairly quickly, and it happens within what we call the Microsoft 365 service boundary, meaning that the data, none of this data leaves Microsoft 365, and it doesn't leave your tenant. And further, we don't train the large language model based on your data. So the large language model is something that we update it periodically based on the latest and greatest, but any information specific to your tenant is just going to get fed in via the prompt and come back in step 3, and then come back in the LLM response in step 4, and then the large language model is not going to remember it. Okay, so there's another whole set of technologies called fine tuning where you can train a large language model. We're not doing that on purpose because we don't want your data to sort of leak into the large language model and start turning up in other tenants and things like that. That would be very, very undesirable. So to just sort of look at how this works, users can interact through any of these different application surfaces. And the Copilot's built-in user interface and the knowledge, including all of the graph content, is available throughout Microsoft 365. What I want to talk about today is how to extend that. So what can users do is really what we call skills, not to be confused with bot skills. If we have any bot framework developers in the audience, they had something called skills. This is a little different. It's really about teaching Copilot to do something new. And those are called Copilot plugins. So if we want Copilot to reach into a database and do a query, for example, which is the example I'll show, then we would use a plugin. And we're kind of giving it the skill of knowing about our database and how to query it. The other option is to increase what Copilot knows. Now, honestly, a simple way to do this is to just upload more content into Microsoft 365. You could just put more documents in there, right? And now it's going to know the knowledge inside the documents. But there's a special way of doing this called a graph connector that I think is particularly useful, and you can provide more of a custom user experience around it. And I'll show you that too. And what this is doing is it's taking more information from some external system, and there's these little icons are for real. There's actually, there's actually ISVs, independent software vendors, building these now. And they can inject the information into the Microsoft graph so that when that same interaction happens that I showed earlier, and it goes to ground the data inside of the graph, it's going to find that extra knowledge as well. And I'll show you both of those scenarios, both the skills and the knowledge. So you can kind of think of it as, two different dimensions of ways of extending Microsoft 365 Copilot. So if I have plugins and connectors, I get to ask more questions. For instance, I might say find assigned service tickets from a certain project management plugin, or find information from an internal wiki that wouldn't normally be available to Microsoft 365. I could say list all the items that are low on stock in an inventory management system, or I could find information on flights. The skills, that is the plugins, are real time, whereas the adding to the knowledge via the graph connectors is going to be kind of up to you to update that information inside the graph, but it does have to kind of get indexed, so it takes a little bit longer. But you have more semantic matching there, which is also useful. And I'll talk about all that. So here's a quick example. This is Jira, which is a project management system that's very popular. And I can just ask it, please find any Jira tickets about DNS issues and draft an email that I can send to users based on the help desk knowledge base article about flushing DNS. So it's going to go into, and notice that I said the word Jira. That was key, because by saying Jira, it actually gave Copilot a little clue that it should check the Jira plugin, right? And you saw it went through some steps there. And this is based on an early build where you can actually see it displayed that way. You'll see how it works now in just a minute. And yeah, it went and found that information and wrote the email. But what's nice is I can also reference. I can see, well, where did that information come from, right? It looks like it came from a Jira ticket and a knowledge base article. And here I can go in and drill in and get more information about that. And this is a particular issue, so maybe I want to mark that issue as complete as part of having sent that email. Here's another quick example from Air India, who actually built one for tracking their flights and their flight delays. So now I can, again, Air India, wind flight. So I'm mentioning the name of the plugin, and I'm getting back information about specific flights in real time. And I can come in and chat about that or view more details based on that. I can also do things like ask it to display information in tables, or do more complex queries like show flights that have a delay of more than 60 minutes in the past month. So there's a lot of interesting things that you can do with that. So let's take a look in a little bit more detail at each one of these scenarios. Plugins, which give Copilot the skill so that it knows how to query your system, and knowledge. So we're going to take information directly and inject it into the Microsoft Graph so that Copilot can work with it that way. So I'm going to start with plugins, and I really like this. Another one of Kamal and my teammates is named Tomomi, and she came up with this graphic that, to me, says it better than anything that I was able to come up with. You can see that at the top, I've got all my tenants' clients, all my tenants' content flowing into the semantic index. And then I could also take information and inject it in using a graph connector coming up from the bottom. Then I can also add plugins. They don't go into the semantic index. Copilot uses them at runtime to do real-time interaction. And all of that goes into creating the response to a user prompt. So we're going to focus just on the plugin for a minute. And there's a few ways of building plugins right now. For professional developers, and this is the one I'm going to show, you can build something in JavaScript, TypeScript, C#, Python, theoretically any language, but the software developer kits for those languages that I mentioned make it easier. And particularly Teams Toolkit makes it much easier to build these in JavaScript, TypeScript, and C#. And what you're really building is a message extension, and I'll show what that means. And Copilot can then take that message extension and use it as a plugin. Now, there are Power Platform connectors and Logic App connectors that have been available for a while, and those can be used also as plugins. However, that's only really available to partners who are in the program, who have certified connectors, and then they have to do some special things to note the connector and make it usable in Copilot. So that's an area that's expanding. And then for low-code developers, you can build plugins using Copilot Studio. But I'm going to focus on the code first approach today. And I'm going to start by showing what a message extension is in the first place. So here I am chatting with my teammate Rabia. She's also on Kamal and my team. We really enjoy our team. And she happens to be in the warehouse, and I want her to check the inventory for me since she happens to be there today. Now, I could ask her what product, I could just put that into the chat. But the problem with that is that she'd immediately have to go back to our inventory system to look up the product, figure out where it is, and go find it on the shelves and things like that. And she might make a mistake. I might type it wrong. It's kind of error prone and adds extra steps to the process. So this message extension is going to allow me, as I'm chatting with Rabia, to actually retrieve some business data and share it with Rabia. And notice that I have 3 different tabs along the top. This will come up in a minute. Product inventory, discounts, and revenue. I'm just going to look up something in the product inventory. So Rabia and I share a love of Indian tea, of chai. So we're going to look up chai, and I get a list of all the products that match that query, and there it is. And now when I send this, Rabia knows right where to look, and she might be on her phone. She could literally update the inventory from here, right from this adaptive card. So maybe she counts one more case than was in the system, and she can go ahead and update the stock immediately from this adaptive card. Notice also at the bottom of the screen is a log file. And this whole thing is a hands-on lab that I'll point you to, so you can build this yourself and try it. So you can see that we started with a query for the name chai. We found one product, and then we updated it to the quantity of 375. Okay, so how does this work? Let's take a look at this thing called the Teams manifest. So every Teams app has a thing called a manifest, which basically tells Teams about the application. And it's also going to tell Copilot about the application in this case. So it's got a name and icon and things like that. And one thing that's really important here is the name and the description, because this shows not only end users, but it also shows Copilot what the app is and what it does, so that Copilot can be smart and know when to use this plugin. And you'll see, actually, Rabia wrote this description. It's a really amazingly detailed, so that Copilot will do a better job. And then if I scroll down, I mentioned it was a message extension. These were originally called Compose extensions, and the manifest for compatibility still says Compose extensions. These communicate using the Azure bot framework, even though there's no actual bot involved. That's just a way of securely sending messages back and forth. So we have the bot ID, and this is filled in by Teams Toolkit. So the beauty of this is if you try this and download the code, all you have to do is, once you've got your tenant and everything set up, is hit F5, and it will go provision the bot and set it up and put the correct ID into the manifest for you, which is certainly very nice. Now I have some commands, and the first one is inventory search. We're going to go back to that one because it's the fanciest one, and I'll start with a simpler one, which is discount search. So these descriptions are extremely important, because this is how Copilot will understand what to do. So if I ask for discounted products, it should find this discount search command, which allows me to search for discounted products by category. So it's important to think through these parameters. So in this case, the parameter, or the argument, if you will, that I get to specify is the category name. So I could find discounted products by category. I can't find discounted products by location or by name, right? Because I only have one parameter, which is the category name. And so just like any application, you kind of have to think through your use cases in advance and figure out what kinds of prompts do you want to be able to answer, and provide the commands and the parameters that allow that. My third one is revenue search. And what's kind of cool about this is I wanted people to be able to search for a range of revenue. Excuse me, getting over a cold. So they could either ask for high or low, or they could ask for a range. And I was thinking, wow, what are all the ways that you could, it's just a text field, right? So what are all the ways you could ask for a range of numbers inside of a text field? And I started to get a bit intimidated by it, because, well, I could use greater than and less than. I could use text and say, less space than space. I could use all kinds of different notations. But wait a minute, I have an artificial intelligence here. So instead of trying to code all the ways of expressing a numeric range, I picked one. I picked a particularly simple one that, if you know JavaScript, there's a split function that I can just split on the dash, and it will just give me the high and low of the range. What could be easier than that? And then in my description, I'm sort of training or teaching the AI how to tell me a range. So please tell me either high or low, or a range of integers in this format. And it worked. It's amazing. It saved me a ton of coding to just express what I wanted in plain natural language. And that's what I got. In fact, the user could even ask for something like 0 to 10K, and it will turn 10K into 10,000, just like that. So very, very helpful. And now if I go back to that first command and take a look at that, what's interesting about this one is, and this is definitely a best practice, is that we have several parameters. We have 5 parameters, which is the max that's allowed right now. So we have the product name, which is the one you saw me use when I looked up chai. But we also have the category name. So I could look for beverages, inventory status, supplier city, and the stock query, which is another one of these ranges. So I could do things like look for beverages that are low on stock, for example, where that it's going to filter on multiple parameters. So then I would expect Copilot to look up beverages as the category name, low stock as the inventory status, and give me back the answer to that query, right? So it becomes much more powerful when I add multiple parameters. So now let's take a look. Here I am inside of Copilot again, and I'm going to say, yeah, please find Northwind products with more than 50K revenue along with any ad campaigns. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are no ad campaigns in the Northwind database. You might even be familiar with the Northwind database. It's this really old database that came out with Microsoft Access, and then it was used in SQL and other places. It just seemed like an easy way to get some data for this demo. And yeah, it found the products, but there's no ad campaigns inside that database. But this is Copilot and it has access to the graph. And it turns out that there were documents in SharePoint when we ran ad campaigns for these products. And you can see that, you know, we once we had an Oktoberfest promotion, we had the April in Paris promotion, and who knew there was such a thing as Swiss Cheese Day? But we actually had a Swiss Cheese Day ad campaign for this particular kind of cheese that I won't attempt to pronounce. But very cool, because it actually is saving me steps by combining information from the inventory system with information from SharePoint, in this case, from Microsoft 365. And I can also hover over these little annotations to find where did it get that information, right? And I could even go in and take a look at the documents if I wanted to. So now I'm going to type new chat. And this is a best practice for end users. And you may have noticed this also in ChatGPT or other AI chats that you've found. What happens is that the AI is doing, or the orchestration is doing something called chaining, where it's taking the prompts and the responses and feeding them back into the large language model so that it has some context of what we're talking about, right? Otherwise, it would be very frustrating to use. However, that can also lead to some unintended consequences. Like if I really want to change the subject, it's still going to be thinking that I'm talking about, you know, products with revenue and ad campaigns, right? So by saying new chat, you're basically telling Copilot, okay, we're going on to a new topic now. Don't keep trying to respond to the context of what we were talking about a moment ago, right? So new chat sort of clears out the memory, if you will. And now I want to ask, check Northwind inventory for dairy products low on stock. Show a table and reference the details for each product. Now, if you look at the log file down at the bottom, you can see, yes, category name is dairy, inventory status is low stock, and it got back 4 products. There they are. And you can see that it formatted them very nicely as a table, which is great, just what I asked for. The only thing that's odd here is I noticed that Camembert is out of stock, it's not out of stock. It's low on stock, and we haven't ordered any. So first off, I thought it was pretty cool that out of all the data that was available in the database, Copilot was smart enough to select the units in stock, units on order, and reorder level as the details to show me, and the suppliers, right? It made, I think, some pretty intelligent choices about what was relevant to a query about what's low on stock, right? It didn't show me discount levels and revenues and things that weren't relevant to stock levels. And now I think we better order some more Camembert. So I'm going to go up to these little references and open up, and there's that same adaptive card that you saw when I was chatting with Rabia. And this time I'm going to restock, and I'm going to order 50 more units of that. And I can take action directly from the adaptive card right inside of Copilot. So what's on my mind now is, okay, that's cool, but why are we having this problem? You know, like we've got dairy products that are low on stock. We should be restocking these things better. So I'm going to pop down and ask it another question. Okay, please draft an email to the procurement team asking if we've had delivery issues with any of these suppliers. So what's nice is it remembers the context, and that's the point of the demo here, is that it knows that I originally asked about products, but products come from suppliers. and it was able to figure out which suppliers they were and word this email to our procurement department, which is pretty darn cool, I think. The only thing I would wish for, and that we don't have yet, is that this email would actually appear in Microsoft Outlook so that I could just send it. Right now, you're going to find yourself having to copy this over to your email client, because the Outlook Copilot can help you write an email, but it doesn't know about plugins yet. So you kind of have to do a little bit of integration in the UI. So we're working on that. All right. So that is, I'm gonna probably have time, depending on how the time goes. I'll have time to show a bit more code from that plugin. And I'd like to show you how the adaptive card works and some of these other things. But before just to sort of pace myself, I want to go on to graph connectors now and make sure that we have enough time for that before I go into more detail on the plugin. So here's Tomomi's chart again. What we're going to focus on this time is the graph connector, where we're actually taking data from outside of Microsoft 365 and bringing it in to the semantic index so that Copilot can work with it. And the data that I chose for this, actually, this was another one of my amazing teammates, Waldeck Mastercards, who wrote this particular graph connector. And I'll point you to that as well. There's detailed instructions on how to build and deploy that. So this is all stuff that you can try at home. And yeah, what we're going to use as our data source is this sample solution gallery. So you may or may not be aware there's this patterns and practices group that has regular community calls on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Really cool. I can point you to that as well. One of the things that they do is they get samples from the community and from Microsoft, and they put together this huge sample gallery. So if you're looking for a sample that uses a particular technology, maybe with certain keywords, you can find it here at this gallery. Now, this is all driven by a web service. And so there's a back-end process that scans through GitHub, finds all the samples, and gathers all the metadata from JSON files that are inside of there. And it provides this web service that makes this particular web page work. So it turns out this web service is also available to anyone, and we're going to use it in this graph connector. So in particular, I'm going to focus on this one sample, simulate errors on Microsoft Graph with HTTP cats, because simulating errors is important and cats are fun. So why not, right? And that is really the work of Waldeck and Tomomi, who put together this fun collection of cat photos called HTTP status cats. So if you're inducing a 529 error, you can actually go in and see some cats sort of acting out a 529 too many requests error. So lots of fun. So this is the sample that I'm going to, kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we get into the graph connector. So what I like about this is that it's so simple. It's just a big node script. So I'm just going to install the dependencies, do everything from the command line. And the first thing I'm going to do is run the create connection part of the script. And again, I'll show you the code in a minute. And it's going to take a while. One of the things it does, it creates the connection. That's just one graph API call. So one REST call to create the connection, and a second one to create the schema. And that takes a while to run. So I'm going to sort of fast forward in time, and it takes about 5 minutes. And then the schema was created. Now I'm going to go ahead and run a second script called load content. And what that's going to do is it's going to iterate through that web service, pull in all 1,720 samples, and upload them all into the graph connector. So let's take a look at how this code works. The first thing it did was it created the connection. This is just a REST call. Now, it's using the Graph client here. The Microsoft Graph has a special client SDK that handles things like throttling, like if you try to request too many things at one time, you might get a pushback that says, hey, wait a few seconds and try that again because I'm busy right now. Other details of authentication are handled by the Graph SDK. So we're using that SDK, but basically you can see it looks a lot like a fetch. It looks just like any other API call. We're calling /externals, /connections, and then posting an ID, a name, description, activity settings, and search settings for that connection, right? So really, you could have just used a fetch and done the same thing. Mind you, you need a fair amount of permissions to do these calls. So you need to be, you need to get consent from a global admin, and there's a maximum of 30 connections per tenant. So you're not going to probably do this in your production tenant. You're probably going to make a special tenant on the side for testing this sort of thing. And then create schema. And it's a similar thing where we're just going to create the schema using a REST call. But what's interesting is, well, what's the schema? Let's take a look at that. Here's the schema. What I'll point out about this is, so we're just defining different properties here. Some of these are mandatory. So you have to have a title. Description, authors are very desirable, very useful for users. But the three that are mandatory are the title, the icon URL, and the URL of the item itself, which is going to be the sample, right? Remember the samples that we were looking at, right? So that's where that's going to go, is into the URL. Now, the last thing we kind of need to do is load all the content. You can look through this on your own to see how we're retrieving the content from that web service. But what's important is, we'll kind of cut to the action here. When it has an item that it's ready to push into the graph, it's going to call this push item function. And it's just another REST call that's going to upload that information. Very simple. So now I have to go into the next step for setting this up, is to go into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. And you have to go into the Search and Intelligence section under Data Sources. And there's the connector that I just created, the Sample Solution Gallery connector. So we can kind of take a look at that quickly. You'll see that it also added something called a result type, which is going to tell me how, and it's connected to that data source, right? That's going to include a data type, an adaptive card for displaying the sample, and or one sample at a time. And you can dig into the code if you want to see more on that, but basically on how that got injected along with the schema. But there's the adaptive card. And now the last thing that you have to do to make this work is, come on. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble here with my technology. Is you have to go in and set that. And I apologize, my screen is not behaving and things are jumping around all over the place. You just have to go in and enable it to run globally, which means that it will work with Copilot. So that's just one checkbox that I'm not showing, obviously. So let's just go ahead and run that. Okay, I don't know why this is giving me in trouble. Usually pre-recorded, this is pre-recorded, and usually pre-recorded demos are more reliable than not. I'm just going to come out and back into PowerPoint. All right. All right, let's try again. So having set this up, one thing I can do is I can search inside of Microsoft 365 and find that connector data. So here I looked up HTTP cats. And yeah, this works with ordinary search. So this is just the plain old vanilla search, and I searched for HTTP cats. There's the sample. And there's actually another one, which has to do with the HTTP status cats, right? And there's that one. And I can also use this in Copilot. So now I'm going to say, I love cats, but I hate HTTP errors. Can you help? And it's going to come back and it's going to actually find this and summarize the information, which I absolutely love. So it actually tells me, about Tomomi and the cat pictures and the whole thing. And now if I go in and take a look at that reference, I'm going to see that it brings me right into that sample with simulating errors on graph with HTTP cats. So very cool and a nice way to bring data that doesn't change too often. And one of the things that I like about this is if you kind of compare these two approaches, the graph connectors are semantic. So whereas the Copilot plugins are real time. So for instance, if I want to know beverages that are low on stock, I'm better off building a plugin because the stock level varies constantly. There's no way I'm going to keep that up to date. On the other hand, if I'm looking for beverages for holiday promotion, that might not be such a great plugin application because unless my database has a query for holiday, how am I going to know what to query on? Whereas a graph connector has the semantic ability, and it might be smart enough to know that hot beverages like coffee and chai and hot cocoa are popular during the holidays, right? So it could go in and figure out and find things based on the semantic meaning in ways that a plugin wouldn't be able to. So to just sort of compare them, another notable thing is that in the plugin, permissions are up to the plugin. So if you want to hide, maybe I only want information on beverages to be available to a certain user and hide the information on produce and dairy and other product lines, right? Well, if I wanted to do that, I'd have to write that into my plugin. I'd have to authenticate the user and then look up the user's permissions in my own database in my own way and enforce that permission. Whereas with Graph, this is all done during the time that you upload the content. So I didn't show it in the sample, but you can put permissions on each item as you're uploading it. And then the Graph Connect, the graph itself will actually enforce those permissions at runtime. Another thing is, how do you update the data? Well, obviously the plugin is going to be real time, and the connector, it's up to you to push fresh data in at whatever interval you want to. So that's really kind of, I guess, another point is this prompt stays within the tenant thing. What am I talking about here? Well, really what this is talking about is that take that Jira example, for instance, that I showed earlier, or the Air India example, either one of those. Those are both third parties, and that pieces of that prompt are going to get sent to Jira, right? Somebody at Jira is going to get, some service at Jira is going to get a request for DNS settings, right? Which was the point of the prompt. They might or might not get the entire prompt, but they're going to get information from the prompt. In fact, I think they can get the entire prompt if they want. So they're not going to get your other Microsoft 365 data, but if you didn't want Jira to see that you were looking for DNS information, then you wouldn't really want to use a plugin for that because sort of by definition, in order to query Jira, it had to provide the context of it's a question about DNS refresh, right? So see what I'm saying? Whereas by pushing if I took all the Jira incidents and pushed them into the graph connector, then the types of queries that are being done would never leave Microsoft 365. So that's kind of a security compliance thing to think about. is that if you're doing a plugin, it's doing all these web service calls or sending messages over the bot framework to whoever wrote the plugin, to whoever owns that plugin. And if you don't want them to see what kinds of queries you're doing, then you probably want to stick with a graph connector for that. So takeaways, and yeah, I guess I won't have time to go into the code anymore, but I'm going to show you where all the code lives so you can actually try all these things yourself. Copilot for Microsoft 365 is kind of your AI chat buddy, and then you can extend it with skills and plugins, and you can extend its knowledge with graph connectors. It's the big takeaway from this whole session. You might say, well, how do I get a development environment that I can use? Now, there has historically been a developer program for Microsoft 365. Unfortunately, that does not work with Copilot because you can't add additional services to those free subscriptions. And I think they may not even really be free anymore because we had some fraud problems. And they've sort of locked some of it down. So I don't know all the details on that, but what I will say is if you want to do this kind of work, what you have to do is purchase could be a tenant of one, and you could use the business standard type of subscription, which is the least expensive, but you need to have a Microsoft 365 tenant that you've purchased, and then you need to add Copilot to it. I don't know what that is in your local currency. But it's, I think, $30 a month US. So that is unfortunately or fortunately, that's the situation right now. We don't have a way of just getting all of this stuff for free. It costs a lot to run this service, and so this is what they've arrived at for people who want to build. However, if you are a software vendor, if you are going to write software that you sell in the App Store, then there is a technology adoption program or TAP program that would give you the Microsoft 365 part of this for free. And I'm sorry, it would give you the Copilot part for free. So you could purchase an inexpensive tenant and then get the Copilot capability through this TAP program. And there's a URL there on how to apply for that TAP program. But note, once again, this is intended really just for software vendors who are going to sell things in the App Store. So as promised, and then I'll open up to questions. Here are the links. So the documentation on Copilot plugins, message extensions, and graph connectors is here. And then if you want to build the Northwind plugin example that I showed, aka.ms/ignite23-lab, you can tell this was a hands-on lab at Ignite late last year. And this will provide detailed instructions to show you exactly how to set everything up and run the sample in your own environment. And then there's a code walkthrough that will kind of give you a tour of the code so you can understand it better. And then that graph sample, that graph connector, is at aka.ms/samples-graph-connector. And that also has detailed instructions. It's not exactly a hands-on lab, but it's not too hard to follow those instructions. And because it's just a few simple node scripts, it's one of the things I liked about it, is that you don't have to wade through pages and pages of code. It just kind of gets right to the point and says, here's the calls you have to make, and here's the three scripts that you would run, or the two scripts that you would run to do those calls. So let's go ahead and open it up, Rashmita, to questions, and Kamal.
Hey, thanks, Bob. I always hands down for that Northwind inventory, but it kind of so aptly fits the way you have to explain whether you want to extend using plugins or whether you want to go for a Microsoft Graph Connector.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of the Northwind. So would you
So
mind
glad.
share? I'll also share the link, but if you mind sharing the link for the Northwind sample,
Yeah,
that would
this is
also
the
be
same one.
great.
This is this Ignite
Okay.
23-lab. And
All right.
if I click it, it should come right up. And so where that brings you is into GitHub. And everything is right here. So we've got a few different samples for Copilot for
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft 365 plugins, right? And if you come in here and you can see samples. So there's several different samples. Maybe you want to try C Sharp. Maybe you want to use JavaScript. You don't like TypeScript, right? And then there's a particularly interesting one here, this doc search. This was written by Aicha Bosch, which is another one of our fine colleagues. And she's taking a little bit of a different approach. Instead of just querying, she's talking to Azure OpenAI and doing additional AI processing inside of her plugin. So that's a particularly interesting one to look at. Anyway,
Indeed.
here's the Northwind one. And if you come into here, there's a lab, and this is it. The lab is just in these markdown files, and you can just follow step by step.
Indeed. Sure, we'll post these links, and yeah, I think we have one question from the chat.
Oh, great.
Sean, thank you so much for the question, but just wanted to kind of rephrase it. I don't know how much I'm trying to get it right. So it says that if you had a choice or choose the app that's described in the manifest to use the adaptive card for the chat, would you first choose the plugin before chatting, or how does that scale? That's what my understanding is. Bob, if you have a different view of this question, please go ahead.
Well, there is a detail that I didn't show. Let me see if I can pull that up on screen. There is a little thing called the plugin panel, and we're doing work to sort of evolve this user experience. So let me give me a second here. And hopefully I can bring this up. But there is, so the adaptive card, two things. First, the adaptive card is really, no, I don't know. This is unrehearsed, so I don't know why it's doing this to me. Maybe I can't show this. This is in a test tenant, and it seems to be demanding more permission. Okay, good. Hopefully this will, it's not happy with me today, but there's this little thing here called the plugin panel, and it's not working, but in this tenant, so I have to find a tenant where it's working. But this is where all your plugins will be listed, and you can kind of turn them on and off. So this is part of how it scales. So I'll work on getting that together. But the other part of it is the adaptive card. So your code is actually producing that adaptive card, and so that's another, aspect of it. You can when somebody clicks the adaptive card to take action, say to update the inventory, what they're actually doing is just sending a message through that bot framework channel. It's really just coming from the adaptive card. Copilot is not involved in those scenarios where it's restocking the inventory and things. That's just the adaptive card doing an action that sends a message back to my app to update.
Right. I think, Sean, I hope your question is answered. If not, I'll leave Bob's social handle, or you can post the question to any of us, or we will try to get this in detail if you're still not able to get your answer sorted out. But anyway, he says thanks. And moving on to the next question is, I think, Bob, you kind of explained about which one to choose, whether the plugin or the connectors. Now, what
Mm-hmm.
factors should I keep in mind when choosing in terms of data? Would you suggest, say, for example, if my data request is kind of increasing, it's more like 100 per second. So in those cases, which one do I go for?
Well, I think I don't know what the limit is. I think you could probably use either one. In the case of the connector, you would be there is a limit of 1 million items. I think it is. So if you had more than 1 million, you would maybe not be able to use a connector. For the plugin, I think it's going to be more about scaling of your application. So you could do sort of traditional scaling things like multiple instances in different geographies in Azure and things like that. And it's capable of doing that. By the way, I got another, just went to another tenant. And
Oh,
this,
cool.
I'm going to just show this plugin panel. So this is something that I didn't show in the demo. Is this little, so you click this little plugins button and it comes up, and here's, you can see Northwind inventory. So I could turn this on and off.
Yeah.
So if I have a bunch of different connectors, plugins, I can use that to, and this is the danger of showing your screen on production, because fortunately that message that popped up was not sensitive in nature, but that was CorpNet. Anyway, that's something that will help to filter down the plugins that you're using.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have another question which says, how Copilot for Microsoft 365 decides which plugin to use? Now, in that, if you look at the ecosystem, how does it decides like, okay, we have to use this plugin?
Right
Is there?
now,
Yeah.
right now it's going to use that plugin panel first. It's only going to see the plugins that you enable. And then it's going to actually do a text match on the name of the plugin, which is why I had to mention Jira, or I had to mention Northwind in order for it to find the plugin. That may change over time, but right at the moment it is it's just a text match. And so
Okay.
somewhere in the conversation, the first time you want to use the plugin, you're going to have to mention the name. You're going to have to include the plugin name, not the whole name. Like
Okay.
the plugin is Northwind inventory. You could just say Northwind or just say inventory. But if you don't say any of those, then it's not going to really kind of know that it should use the plugin. Yeah. So a little bit
Oh,
of a
will
user
it?
training issue for
Yeah.
now.
Oh, or say for example, I type something say related to Git. The moment I say Git, it could mean a lot of things: GitLab, GitHub, Gitbucket. So in that case, does it kind of prompt you asking, are you looking for something on those bases, or how does that work?
Well, no, what we'll do, I mean, that's right now it's kind of relying on the user to turn them on and off. So if you had two that were the same or very, very similar, you would maybe want to turn one off to disambiguate. And
Okay.
then if there's more than one, it's gonna try to figure it out based on the descriptions. So a tip that I didn't mention is developer mode.
Okay.
So if you go in, if you kind of want to figure out what's going on with that, and you can type -developer. Come on.
Yeah, that's a handy one.
-developer on. And now let's make sure that Northwind is enabled. It is. So now let's try it. Please look up chai in Northwind. And hopefully it will work. And it's going to take maybe a little extra second because this is running in my Azure in kind of the cheap service. So it's got to go reconstitute the service each time. Yep, found it. There we go. Great. So
Whoa.
it found it, and it's found in the inventory app. That's great. It found all kinds of additional information, which is kind of fun. But then see down here, this is,
Yeah.
oh, look at this. It didn't, let me try that again. I'm not so sure that did work, actually. What was that all about? This was found in the app. See, this found this in a document. So this is where it can get a little bit tricky. I said new chat, and it didn't like that. I have to click new chat up here, I guess. So please look up. Let's try a different product and see if it can find it. Anyway, that developer mode will tell you which plugin it found and what it tried to do. So usually, there's definitely, with writing Northwind, I will say there was a lot of work, not just writing the service, but writing that manifest and figuring out that the descriptions, because that's really what Copilot is going to use. Here we go. So this time it worked. I think, you know what, I think my service, remember I said I was in the cheap Azure service, the one where it has to reconstitute the web service if you haven't used it in a while. So this time it worked. I suspect it timed out the first try. So
Mm-hmm.
here I am, and it's giving me all the information, and I've got my nice adaptive card and everything, and it still found a document mentioning it, which is kind of interesting. But now here it is, enabled plugins. It found the Northwind inventory. It figured out which. It looked at revenue search, discount search, and inventory search, which were my three commands. It selected inventory search, and then it went and made a call to my plugin and got back a status 200
Yeah.
success.
Yeah, this
So
is in
using
more
this, you
detail
can
when you
really
switch on
see.
the developer mode, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't want, end users wouldn't want to bother with
Yeah,
this, but this is really good for debugging and getting your manifest working properly.
awesome. All right. Thanks, Bob. I think we are done with the questions. Rashmita, do we have any more questions?
No, Kamal, not at the
All
moment.
right. All right.
Well,
Thanks.
thanks. Yeah,
Thank you, Bob, so much. It's been an awesome session on extending Copilots, and always we get to see a lot of tips and tricks, especially with the Northwind inventory. So, looking forward for more sessions on it. So, do leave a comment if you would love to know more about the Northwind or more topics in detail. Bob would be glad to join you guys and talk about it. And stay tuned for the next week where we have another awesome speaker where he would be talking about building M365 Copilot extension to bring external data. So it's all about getting your
excellent.
external data into Copilot extensions. So let's see. Let's look forward for the March 27th, Wednesday. And I think Rashmita will kind of post the link for the next session. And thanks, Bob. Thanks again. Thank you, Rashmita. You've been awesome. Looking forward to it. Bye.
Thanks so much. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. Bye.